So, hello everybody, and welcome to Mitratech's morning coffee show. My name is Henry Umney, and your host for today. And today, I'm very glad to be joined by Adam Tan. Adam leads the model risk management in the UK for KPMG, and brings over 20 years of experience in model risk management. So, Adam, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Henry.
So, subject today, model risk management. So, following the KPMG and Mitratech have had a series of webinars we've done with UK Finance, and post a recent webinar we did with them on recent statutory paper 123. Thought today we'd try and dig into that sort of murkier world of DQMs, or deterministic quantitative methods, to give it its full name, as well as the sort of non-models that 123 have brought into firms' purview. I mean, specifically, I think sort of areas I think we should talk about is, what is a DQM? I guess, why they're important, and what firms should how firms should go about sort of addressing them. But before we start, given this is a coffee show, I have to ask you, how do you take your coffee in the morning?
Black, please.
Just black.
Just black.
Just black. Purist, not
Absolutely.
short, not long.
No.
Oh, God, blimey.
Pure.
Straight, simple black Americano.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, double espresso man myself, but there we go. So let's get started. Models obviously came into prominence, or model risk management came into prominence after the seminal paper SR 11.7. There have been various updates. The OCC Model Risk Handbook. Over here in the UK, we've had DSCEO letters, obviously the CP 622, and now PS paper 623 and the CP registration 123. I guess the big difference that I've observed, and we discussed this before, is really this definition of DQMs, and really bringing in, I think previously we'd seen reference to that wider ecosystem of tools and non-models, but now that the paper has defined that firms need to look at not just that core model set of models, but there is a wider ecosystem that comes into the purview, and they need to understand. So, I guess taking a step back, so a lot of people would have read the paper and gone, "Oh, DQMs, what are they? Non-models." Maybe we could just give us a 101 on what a DQM really is.
No, that's a great question. So I think that question has been on everyone's lips, right? And I'll start with DQMs. I think it's important to bear in mind that the PRA, as you mentioned, Henry, has provided a broad and, dare I say, expanded definition of so-called models, right? And the PRA starts with defining a wide variety of quantitative methods, systems, approaches, EUCs, calculators, etc., which are often used to support all sorts of business decisions, right? Whether it's strategic, financial reporting, risk, capital, liquidity, etc. Now, models as we know it tend to be the sort of stochastic, non-deterministic, and they are essentially a subset of quantitative methods. So I think it's really important to make that distinction. So hopefully, I think this kind of working definition of what a model is, I think it seeks to bring sort of greater consistency and clarity for firms as they start to think about implementing revised, enhanced MRM frameworks. So it needs to encapsulate not just the traditional models as we know it, credit risk models, market risk models, valuation models, etc., but also the material DQM / non-models.
So we're now expanding that definition, or making sure that people understand that there is this wider set of tools that people need to consider. I guess the question really is, why is this important to organizations? So we have we've had this model definition. As I say, I think there's two things. One, the model definition got slightly wider, but also the wider purview of all DQMs are now in scope. Why is that important? Why the PRA talking about this now?
I think it boils down to two things, right? I think coming back to my earlier point, I think the industry pre SS123 have viewed models in a in quite a sort of a distinct definition, right? It's statistical, non-deterministic, etc. So I think now it boils down to firms having to look at DQMs or non-models and to look at them in terms of its actual use case. What is it actually being used for? And I think the reason why that's important is whether it's being used for financial reporting purposes, forecasting, liquidity, capital, etc., is because as these models are critical to business decisions, we need to start governing them to a higher standard, right? And the issue we have as well is across many firms, many of these so-called DQMs are currently being governed in an IT-esque way, right? So the kind of governance would be along the lines of access controls, change controls, etc.
So your normal software development life cycle.
Exactly, as opposed to, do we really understand what the model, what these DQMs are actually trying to do, the methodology underpinning it? Are there any limitations? What sort of assumptions are being applied, etc., etc.? And I think this sort of end-to-end view of how we need to look at DQMs, I think I certainly believe the industry does welcome that.
Okay.
More governance,
even though it's going to be a challenge for the modelling team.
It will be a challenge, absolutely.
Because they're overburdened anyway. I mean, I do recall, as I said, we've done a series of webinars with UK Finance, with KPMG and Mitratech. I think one of the first ones 2 or 3 years ago, Dietrich Pottinger from PRA turned up, and this, I guess, pre the CP and PS coming out, obviously explaining that model risk is very, very important. And I think, as you say, gave 2 examples, LTCM and the JP Morgan whale, showing how the losses associated with model risk, the JP Morgan one associated a lot with end user computing and things sitting outside of that model risk purview, far outweighed any of the other operational losses that you'd seen in the previous decade. So, clearly that was his thinking was feeding into that paper. I guess the $1 million question then is, right, we whether we like it or not, the PRA has shone the light on this, that the wider DQM issue, and they say in terms of being able to understand which of those assets are important to us, making sure we have the appropriate controls in place. For people who haven't addressed this risk and really are only focused on the models as old defined, what is it practically people can do? What should people be thinking? Because, I mean, the clock is ticking. 17th of May to, I think
2024.
17th of May 2024 is the date when you need to demonstrate some form of compliance. What is it people need to be thinking about between now and 17th of May, and what a 2-part question: what do they need to do, and what looks good? Because I think we can make an assumption that what they're doing in the modelling world, as was defined pre these papers, is okay. How do modelling teams? Is it the modelling team's job to expand into that, or is it other people coming to the modelling teams?
No, absolutely. I think what's really important is to try to look at this through a practical lens, right? So the question is, for the DQMs that have been identified, what can you leverage in terms of what has already been done from a governance perspective and perform that governance uplift, right?
Yeah.
So if the existing governance is IT-esque, one should start thinking about, what sort of testing needs to be carried out as regards the implementation as well as the use of these DQMs and the monitoring sort of approach on the back of that. So I think not all is lost, right? I think it's not a journey starting from zero. But on the other hand, there will be a number of DQMs that have not been identified. So I think what needs to happen is there needs to be a discovery or exploratory phase to identify what these DQMs are. So speaking to the business, speaking to the various functions to basically understand what is being used for decision-making purposes is step 1. I think step 2 would be to document these DQMs, right?
Yeah.
And coming up with a set of standards for these DQMs from a documentation perspective. And what's also important is, as you gather more information around these DQMs, there needs to be some sort of a risk tiering methodology as well, based on the use case and the complexity of these DQMs. And ultimately, these will need to feed into an inventory, right? And I think that to me, it's really, really critical, right? It's not just housekeeping. I think it's a key governance and control requirement for this to really work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've seen that practically. So, in simplistic terms, there's the old model world. Then you've got someone's described them as tools, which is, again, got its own policy, different governance levels as opposed to a model. So important, but I think the important thing you said there is the tiering of them. A classification as a core model, as a wider DQM, which is not necessarily a full model, but then tiered in there with the appropriate level of governance. And then the non-models are EUCs. And again, different levels of governance, not one size fits all. I think one observation I've had from modeling teams is, the universe has expanded so much. How can they possibly apply that same governance across everything? And the reality is the proportionality, which the paper talks about a lot, it needs to be proportional. And I guess that's, to your point, we need to be agreeing what those tiers are, what that governance level are. And then if we haven't found all of these things, make sure that we have got some assurance that the inventories we've got are complete and up to date, and then make sure that the appropriate people who are responsible for that are aware and putting the appropriate controls in place.
Because it comes back to your earlier question, right? Should this be under the purview of MRM? I don't think that question should be answered at the outset. I think what needs to happen is we need to understand what the landscape and what an estate looks like. If it's significantly complex, then I think MRM needs to be more involved. Yeah. But if we find that some of these tools, whilst it's important and whilst it's critical, the actual methodology that underpins it is actually quite simple. Do you actually need a quant
to be reviewing
to review, monitor, validate that? Yeah. Does it have to be validated every year? So if you were to incorporate sufficiently robust monitoring procedures, and if that can be done by a non-quant, then it needs to be structured accordingly. So I think there needs to be, to your point about proportionality, absolutely. And I think there needs to be a balance as well in terms of, we need to seek the facts first before we can then start to build out what the operating model is going to look like from a governance perspective.
So it's going to be different from firm to firm, depending on their business and the complexity of the business and the underlying models that they have. Well, Adam, listen, thank you very much indeed for joining us today for the coffee show. Your first time. We'll have to get you back again. Thank you very much for joining. If anybody is interested, Adam's details and my own details will be on the show notes, but please feel free to reach out to us. But Adam, thank you very much again for joining us.
Pleasure.